All right. So I want to share a story with you guys called the Six Swans. This is only my second time telling it in front of a human audience, so um, bear with me a little bit. But I was first introduced to this story by John, who's also here in this school, um, wandering out in a field of asters, and he was like, "You need to know this story." And I just recently finished a storytelling class, so this was kind of the story that I worked on for that. So. Beyond seven lands and seven seas, there was a king. And one day he was out hunting in the wood. He had caught the tracks of an elk. He was intent on following this, getting closer and closer to the elk. Focused on that hunt was he that he did not notice the sun setting around him, the night falling, a thick fog rolling in. And soon he realized that he had passed the same tree for the third time and started to get nervous. He paused for a moment to consider what to do next, and just at that moment, an old woman approached him. And that old woman, she had a look about her, a bit of mischief, a little wild, a little disheveled. And he knew in an instant that this was a witch, that this was a powerful woman that he was dealing with. And she told him, "My king, it appears that you are lost." And he said, "Indeed, I am." She said, "I can help you, but I do have a condition for you. If I help you, you must marry my daughter." And like I said, the king recognized that this was a powerful woman, and he was filled with apprehension with this. He did not have a good feeling about this deal, but he also knew that with this woman's power, that there was no way that he was leaving this wood without her help. And so he agreed to this marriage, and he and she led him out of the wood and to the home that she shared with her daughter. And it appeared the daughter had been expecting them. But soon after, the daughter and the king were married. Now, this wasn't the king's first marriage. He was widowed, and he had six sons and a youngest daughter. And as I said, he had a bad feeling about this new marriage, and so he protected his children. He kept them off in a remote castle where even he could not find them except with the help of magic. He had a magical ball of yarn that he could throw out in front of him, and that ball would roll. And he would follow the string out to the castle where his children stayed. And so, as often as he could, multiple times a week, he would make that journey out to the castle, check on his children. They were always overjoyed to see him. And um, and eventually, this new queen became suspicious, wondering where the king was going. And she was wise to the ways of watching the servants, of well placed bribes, of getting the information that she needed. And soon she learned that this ball of yarn was the key to getting what she wanted. So one day she took that ball of yarn, rolled it out, followed the string, and made her way out toward that castle. The children, assuming it was their father, for he was the only one who knew how to get there, were overjoyed and ran out to greet him, the six boys all charging ahead. And that new queen, she cast a spell, turning all six of those boys into swans, who then flew away. The daughter, slower and younger than her brothers, hadn't made it out of the castle, and so she watched through a window as all of this happened, and frightened, hid under a bed. The queen, assuming that she had transformed all of the children, then turned around and left. The next day, the king returned to the castle, and this time Only the daughter was there to greet him. She explained everything that happened. And though the king was suspicious of the queen, felt that he could best keep her safe in the castle. She asked for one night to gather her possessions and a little bit of time before she returned with him, knowing that she did not trust this woman and that she would not go back with the king. So that night, having gathered all her possessions, she set off on her own. And the next day, after wandering and sleeping in the wood, she came upon a small hunter's cabin. And she heard some familiar voices. As she peeked in to the cabin, she actually saw all 6 of her brothers, and then knocked and entered. They explained the situation. They explained that they had been transformed into these swans, that for 15 minutes a day they would return to their human form, but that every day that they would be swans forevermore. He said, "Oh, there must be something that I can do to reverse this curse, to bring you back." They said, "No, it is impossible. There is no way you could do it." She said, "What is it? What is the way?" They said, "We cannot ask it of you. It's too much." She said, "I'm going to do it. What is it?" And they said that you must weave each of us a sweater from aster flowers. And while you are doing that, you cannot speak or laugh. And you have 6 years to complete all 6 of these sweaters. And she said, "I will do it." And at that moment, the brothers transformed back into swans, flew out the window, and were on their way. So she made her way through the forest until um, until she reached the edge, out to a meadow. And so she would go out into the meadow, gather the asters, and then come back into the shelter of the wood. And this was what she would do each day, was gather the flowers, go back into the wood, weave them, gather more. Usually she liked to climb up into a tree to be a bit more sheltered from anyone who would pass by. But one day a hunting party took notice of her, and the men kept trying to get her attention. And she, kind of like a woman engrossed in her book on the subway, just really did not want to engage with these people. And so she threw her gold necklace down to them, hoping that they just wanted money and that they would leave her be. But they kept trying to talk to her. Eventually, the king who was hunting with them came up, and he was struck by her beauty and asked her to marry him. She considered her options. She looked at this man. She noticed that he had kind eyes. And she was old enough and realistic enough to know that the next person to come upon her in the woods may not be so kind. So she agreed to his offer. He spoke to her in every language that he could, and she would not respond. Eventually, they went back to the kingdom, and the king's mother did not care for this woman who would not speak, who would not laugh. How could she know that this new woman is good enough for her son, the king? So she kept advising the king not to marry this woman, kept trying to interfere and intervene, knowing that if this person wasn't his match, wasn't up to his caliber, that it diminished all of their power. But there was no persuading him. He had been so captivated by her beauty. He sensed something beyond her physical beauty, and so he insisted that they marry. So they had a large feast and a joyous celebration. They, not long after, she became pregnant. They were overjoyed. Still, she did not speak. Still, she was going out to the meadows and grabbing the asters and weaving and making these sweaters out of the aster flowers. And eventually, the new queen gave birth. And they were overjoyed. But several days later, the babe was gone and her mouth was smeared with blood. Now the queen mother went to the king and said, "You must get rid of this woman. I think you should kill her. But I mean, she at least needs to be banished. She has to go. She just ate your child." And the king insisted. He said, "No, there must be some other explanation for this. I will not do that." And so she kept her silence. She kept her weaving. Soon she was with child again. She gave birth to another child. And again, the baby disappeared. Again, she was smeared with blood. Again, she offered no explanation. Again, the queen mother is in the king's ear saying, "Something must be done." The and again, he would not cast her aside. She continued with her weaving, and again she became pregnant. Again she had a child, and again that child disappeared and she was smeared with blood. And at this point, the queen mother goes to the king again, and again the young woman offers no explanation for what has happened. And without that explanation, the king feels that his hands are tied, that he cannot keep this woman as his wife. And so they put up a stake. They intend to burn her. And as they are taking her to burn her, 6 swans fly by. And she casts 6 sweaters up onto them, all of them complete except for one for the youngest brother, which is missing a sleeve. And those 6 brothers transform from swans back into men, except for that one wing. And at that moment, the queen is able to share her story, to explain that in fact it was the queen mother who had been taking the children, who had been framing her for all of this. The king and the brothers were enraged, unsure what the adequate course of action, of what justice would be in this situation. And so the cruelest thing they could think of was to banish her. And so that's what they did. Now, some people have said that they do still see a black swan at the edge of the forest and the meadow, trying to figure out a way to make a sweater for herself. Others say that this story, after she was banished, simply ended happily ever after. But as anyone who's been married knows, there are slights much smaller than trying to burn your wife at a stake that stick with you, that build resentment, that can't be moved past. But luckily, the king was someone who understood what needed to be done to repair. He was wise beyond his years. He took that time and that care to rebuild with her, to incorporate the brothers into the kingdom. And though I don't know that you could say that they lived happily ever after, they did live on in peace and prosperity, and so did their descendants.